This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson.
Yes, hello, this is your host, Harry Wilkinson, and welcome once again, I hope, to the Spirit and Wellness Show. Or, if this is your first time tuning in, welcome to a show about the days and weeks events, happenings in the world of economics, politics, international news, the media, everything that affects our lives, everything that we interact with via news and media stories. And we take a look at it from a higher perspective. We take a step back. We reconnect with our higher selves and recognize that these stories we are creating, these stories which we're literally creating to tell ourselves about ourselves, are just that, stories. They're illusions. They are, in a way, holographic games, or if you don't like the term games, if that's a little too light and offhanded, you can think of them as virtual world interactions in which you face a series of challenges. You move in and through these worlds as a character who is unknowing, weak, vulnerable, everything that we at our highest selves, everything that we in our true selves are not. This makes it more challenging, doesn't it? I mean, if you're going to play a game, you're going to set certain rules and perhaps certain restrictions that keep you from or make it more challenging. If we know, if we know the truth of ourselves, and that is that we are invulnerable and that we are eternal and so on and so forth, then it doesn't make the game very much fun. And that's what it's about. So we take a look at these stories, and rather than let them, in many cases, push our buttons in one way or another to make us cringe with fear and anger and outrage, or make us cheer as if we're cheering our favorite sports team or movie star, we take a look at it from a higher perspective. We take a look at what we've created and appreciate it and understand how it leads us to a greater understanding of our higher selves and who and what we really are. So that's a very long-winded introduction to this podcast. If you've never heard it before, if you have heard it before, forgive me for reiterating what I've said time and time again. But it seems like it bears repeating at the beginning of each show, just so that we kind of reconnect. We kind of understand or are on the same page of what we're trying to do here. When I started doing the show quite a few years back, I did it out of a sense of I did it very selfishly, out of a sense of a determination to keep myself focused on that point of view, and to not let myself get overwhelmed or have my buttons pushed too much. Or, I won't say that I don't have my buttons pushed anymore. I know when they're being pushed, and I get it, and I sort of appreciate that part of the whole thing, and then I'm able to move away from it. In fact, that actually gives me a way to sort of get into the energy of whatever it is that has pushed my buttons, and take the energy from that and learn from that. I'll say that's kind of where I'm at the point right now. But I know many people who consider themselves to be spiritual seekers, have had a great deal of, or many have great deal of issues with the news media. They feel like everything that gets covered is, disasters and negatives, and there's a truth to that. There is a truth to that. The way that our media gatekeepers, and gatekeepers, by the way, are the term that we use when we talk about those that make the decisions as to what stories are told in a news broadcast, as well as those companies, those corporations, those, in some cases, individuals who own the media platforms on which the news is broadcast. Those are what we call the gatekeepers, because they have a certain control over what gets expressed. Now, clearly, in recent years, with the rise of the internet, Web 2.0, and so many bloggers out there, the ground has literally shifted underneath the traditional gatekeepers, and they can't keep the gate so much anymore, which I think is a good thing in many ways. There are probably downsides to that, in that perhaps information gets out before it is verified, and so forth and so on. But, in the long run, I think what it leads to is us as individuals taking responsibility for finding the information we want to find and fact-checking it. It makes us, I think, ultimately, by giving us more responsibility rather than being spoon-fed news and so forth and so on. If we have a bit of mistrust about what's being told to us, it helps us to look at it in a different way. And it helps us to go behind it and take a look at what might be going on behind the scenes and so forth and so on. But in any case, what I was saying about spiritual seekers and their issues with the media, many, have thought that, well, you know what, I'm just not going to expose myself to that anymore. I'm just going to, disconnect from all of that stuff. Turn off the radio, turn off the TV, not look at any news reports. And, my take on that, as I said, was that, that might work for you for a while. It's a fun and interesting experiment to do for a week or two, or maybe even a month. But sooner or later, you're going to be faced with it again. Unless you move to a mountaintop and you want to do that, you're going to somehow, some way be, confronted with these stories, these issues, this media. It's so much a part of us. So much a part of us that it's almost a futile attempt to try to do that, although you can try. But more than just the futility of it, I think in trying to, disconnect, if you will, you're missing a great opportunity. You're missing an opportunity to really use what's being given to you in a way that is healthful and helpful in reconnecting to who we really are, in a way that I explained before, in the sense that we look at these stories as stories we're telling about ourselves, illusions, holograms in which we are participating in a game in which we are playing the exact opposite of who and what we really are in truth, which is oneness, which is connectedness, which is eternal, and which is complete, complete oneness. So we're here to play this game, and I think we've designed it that way. And of course, there's a certain amnesia element to it because we forget that we've designed it that way, and that makes the game even more interesting. So that is how I approach these things on this show, and how I've continued to do so, and I plan to do so as long as I do the show. little bit of a different focus this time around, this year and forever, for however long I intend to do it. We're now focusing on what I'm calling the transition era, which is an era of change, rapid change, and a change towards a world that people scoffed at, yes, scant years ago, but which is now quickly becoming reality. And a complete change in the economy, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, and we're certainly going to be getting back to that discussion. But right now, last week, I began a discussion about the environment. So we're going to continue that discussion a little bit about how our approach to the environment and our awareness of global warming have brought about, a change in how we see it. So I'm going to add a little bit more to that discussion, though we talked quite a bit about it last week, so I won't spend too much time on it. And then for the rest of the program, I want to honor Anne Streiber, as well as her husband, Whitley Streiber. If you are unfamiliar with them, Whitley Strieber and Anne Streiber are novelists, but they're also very active in the community of spirituality and strong believers in the unknown, if you will. You may know of Whitley Strieber's books on UFOs and his ordeal in what he says was alien abduction. Communion is probably the most well-known of his novels. It actually was made into a movie not too long ago. But he and his wife have been active in this, not only in their literature, but in their activities. And they have a website called unknowncountry.com in which they have oodles and oodles of information about all kinds of things that are important. But we're going to honor Anne Streiber because she passed away last week on August 11th, just 2 weeks before her birthday would have been. And Anne was a constant partner to Whitley, so we're going to read what Whitley has been experiencing since Anne's passing. It's quite an amazing story. And we'll also look at, as I said, we'll continue somewhat our conversation on climate change. But first, I started last week to tell you about the history of yoga. And some of the myths that have grown up around it. There was a article in the Washington Post about the 5 myths about yoga that many believe. So I wanted to go further with that and also talk about some of the history of yoga. And I think this is probably going to be a continuing segment of the show because there's so much to talk about when it comes to yoga. And yoga is something that I'm extremely supportive of and a big promoter of. I think, if you're talking about transition era, I think yoga represents the transition of how we think about exercise and our bodies, where we go from a, sort of muscle building approach, building the outer out, if you will, and, sort of trying to approach our body health and strength from the outside. Yoga represents strengthening from the inside out, giving you a core of strength from which you can then, build. If I had to explain yoga, in a short period of time. That's how I would explain it. So there's been quite a bit of debate about the religiosity of yoga or lack thereof. Certainly, from my perspective, it is a spiritual discipline and a fitness discipline, and both fit. Uh, you don't have true physical fitness, if your spiritual fitness isn't intact as well. But in any case, there are some people who do use it, in a religious sense. It began with Hindu religions, but it is, even in its centuries of development, it's been shaped by all kinds of different ideas and practices, from Buddhist to Jains and other religions as well. The debate today has come from conservative Christians who feel that promoting yoga is anti-Christian and therefore evil. Some of these Christians say that if they should take up yoga, they must either deny the reality of what yoga represents or fail to see the contradictions between their Christian commitments and their embrace of yoga. And I guess I'm one of those that fails to see how there's any contradiction at all between a Christian belief system. Although I don't know. I mean, I don't know what these Christian commitments they're talking about are. And I think they probably change with the different denominations of Christianity as well. So, but I don't want to go too far into that. I just want to say that, there have been forms of yoga that are religious explicitly, from the Hindu school, and more recently Christian varieties. Christians who want to participate in yoga but feel somehow threatened by the Hindu aspect of it have created something called holy yoga. And it describes itself as experiential worship to deepen people's connection to Christ. So, as I say, I use it, and many people use it as a way of stress release and a form of meditation. For me, it is a form of spiritual meditation. I don't consider that to be in part of any organized religion, but that's pretty much what it was. Now I'm going to explain a little bit of this history of yoga. There are all kinds of styles of yoga. There's Raja yoga. There's kingly yoga. There's Dharma yoga, which is the yoga of work. Basically, it's turning your everyday tasks, whether you're washing the dishes or vacuuming the floor, into a yoga exercise, a meditation, if you will. But what we know of yoga is what the Hindus refer to as Raja Yoga. And our current form of yoga that we know was introduced by, Swami Vivekananda is one person who's credited for that. He was, and we've talked about him on the show before, by the way. He was a reformer of Hinduism, but he was also really very much a voice for a new spiritual outlook. He came to the United States in the late 19th century and spoke, in many different places and was greeted with quite a bit of enthusiasm. And many people call him the father of yoga. in the West at least. And, we talked about Vivekananda and his visit to the World Parliament of Religions in Chicago. That was back in 1893. And he lectured at, retreats and universities, and he spread the message of what he calls Kriya Yoga. He said, I have a message to the West as Buddha had a message to the East. And he started a center where he taught these Raja Yoga classes. And one of the biggest meditations that he used in his yoga practice was, you are not your body, you are not your mind. The meaning was clear. Only through yogic fusion of the body and the mind can one attain complete harmony with the greater being. Well, I think what he meant by that is that, that whole idea of illusion I've been talking about. We are not our bodies or our minds. Our minds are the illusion. And there are illusion machines to create the illusion. But I digress. But there have been other people who have also been very important to the growth of yoga. And one of them is Paramahansa. I'm going to say that again because I think I've mispronounced that. Where is it now? There he is. His name is Paramahansa Yogananda. And he started the Self-Realization Fellowship in 1920, where he taught Kriya Yoga and meditation and classes on spiritual living. This, by the way, continues on. His Self-Realization Fellowship still continues. There's a website, which is yogananda-srf.org, and I'll post it on my Facebook page if you'd like to check it out. But he gave classes for more than 30 years on yoga, and his was maybe even more of a spiritual approach. He envisioned yoga as a scientific path to the experience of God and taught what he called Kriya Yoga at a time when such religious experimentation was unusual and discouraged. So we're talking about the early 20th century. As I said, 1920s is when he began to do this. So those are two of the important figures in the history of yoga. And we'll continue to talk about them and what they have to say. So, I'm going to make this a regular segment. That's what I'm going to do hopefully every show, if we have time. But just briefly to get back to the climate change, and then I want to get to the tribute to Anne Streiber. We just found out this week that July is considered to be the hottest month on record ever. Since we've been keeping records. And so, again, this is another sign of, the climate change that we've talked about. And, of course, as temperatures reach higher and higher into the upper atmosphere, the circulation and storm activities will continue as well. And will become very unpredictable. That is the thing about global warming, or climate change, as some want to call it. And I want to read to you what Whitley Streiber has to say about climate change, because I like what he has to say about the fact that we have stopped using the term global warming because we feel like those who are in denial about it use it to say, oh, well, look, it's hot out or it's cold out. How could there be global warming? What global warming and climate change do is add a huge level of severity and unpredictability in the weather, so that places that are used to warm temperatures suddenly are plunged into cold, and vice versa. Everything gets topsy-turvy. It's not about, the whole world is suddenly, hot. It's not about the temperature that's on your thermometer. But anyway, I don't want to get too far into that one either. But again, July, hottest month ever. And they say the reason for the extraordinary and rapid heating that is taking place is that the oceans are no longer absorbing heat and are instead themselves warming to record levels. And of course, the methane emissions and so forth. Now, on the opposite side of this, as I talked about last week, you have, finally the United States stepping up, thanks to the President Obama's policies, to make some very serious commitments to cutting down emissions to help the climate change. Now, problem is it's still very much a almost schizophrenic approach that we have. I mean, this president is more, climate change savvy than any president, and more willing to do something about it. But on the other hand, his administration is also, giving the go-ahead for drilling and the kind of drilling that will, work against what we're trying to do with climate change. So you have that, one step forward, two steps back kind of thing. And you also have these new companies that are emerging that can remove carbon from the atmosphere. And that's really important, because whatever we do now to limit the carbon emissions, it'll help. It'll help, 50, 60, 70, 80 years down the road. It's not going to help us now. And we are dealing with climate change right now. Okay. So I want to read to you Whitley Streibers' discussion of what he's been going through since his wife, Anne, passed away last week. My wife, Anne, left this level of being 2 weeks ago. In that short time, there have been so many manifestations of her continued presence and involvement with others in this world that I thought I would write a bit about what has happened. Before I begin, I'd like to take a moment to talk about how profoundly, deeply conditioned we are to look outward into the world around us. There's nothing wrong with this. It's our nature. Our bodies and our senses direct us into the world around us. Many, if not most of us, especially in the modern world, live by the assumption that our bodies and the world we see around us are all that exists. Some of us still cling to old beliefs that tell a different story. But very, very few of us are like Anne, who did not share any of the old religious beliefs, but did believe in the soul. She didn't just believe in a subjective sense. Because of her near-death experience in 2005 and an event in our old cabin in upstate New York a few years earlier, she had proof of the soul on an objective, if personal, level. As a result of this, she died like many people who have near-death experiences without even the slightest unease. She wrote eloquently about it in her diary entry, The Love That Led Me Home. You can read the whole diary on their website, unknowncountry.com. These lines from it are relevant to this discussion. All that really survives of us is the love we have made in the world. It's a simple truth that will stay with me forever, even when I pass again across this threshold, this time never to return, especially then. And that is what remains of her, the love that filled her being and has now become her being. Before she lost consciousness, she was eagerly looking forward to her new experience and ready to go. Among her last acts were gentle efforts to comfort me and our kids. When it came time to die, she turned toward it without fear. The first things that happened took place in the days prior to her death. On the Friday before, I read a review in the newspaper about a movie called Diary of a Teenage Girl that I thought Anne would really enjoy. Later, when I went to our bedroom to wake her up, her first words were, "When are we going to the movie?" She was no longer able to get around, so I had to tell her that we couldn't go. The day after she passed, I went to the movie for both of us. On the next day, which was Saturday, one of our caregivers had a powerful sense that Anne was not in her body, but was hanging in the air above the bed. There was a sense of great happiness filling the room. She got a message. Anne wanted new pajamas, something pretty in which to spend her last days. So powerful was this communication that the caregiver immediately rushed out and bought Anne a lovely new pair of pajamas. On Monday morning, Anne was now semi-conscious. I was in the most powerful emotional state I had known until that time. As always, we slept side by side, hand in hand. When I had squeezed her hand during the night, she had squeezed back, but now the squeeze was getting weaker and weaker. I asked her if she could hear me. She nodded weakly, so I spent the day reading poems that we loved. Song of the Wandering Aengus, There Was a Child Went Forth, Ode on Intimations of Immortality, recollected from early childhood. I read Ecclesiastes and Molly Bloom's Soliloquy from Ulysses, and many of the couplets from Joe Brainerd's I Remember. On Tuesday morning when I woke up, it was to another explosion of joy. I felt as if she was no longer in her body, but nearby. Later our son came in, and she was able to put her one good arm around him and whisper what were to be her last words to him, I love you. I did not want her to hear me crying, so I stepped into our little office, where I was surprised to see a book entitled Physics from Fisher Information lying out on one of the bookshelves. What was so surprising about this was that nobody had touched this book in years. I asked everybody who might have been in the room, and nobody had pulled it out. Lying on the cover was a note to go to page... I don't see the page number here, but the note had been inside the book. Now it was lying on top. When I went to the page, I read the underlined passage. This implies that somehow a single measurement is equivalent to an infinity of measurements over all space. How could this occur? An obvious answer is that the single measurement takes place when all of space is squeezed into a single point. This presumably is the Big Bang. The implication of this is that a single observation of the metric occurred at the onset of the universe, and this generated the Wheeler-DeWitt equation for the pure radiation universe which existed then. In other words, the gravitational structure of the universe was created out of a single primordial quest for knowledge. When I read those last few words, I was reminded again of Anne's diary about her near-death experience and the importance of love, and I felt the immense, abiding love that is behind the phrase, a single primordial quest for knowledge. The knowledge gleaming through the vast desert of the universe. Oh, there's so much more here, and I'm running out of time, but let me see how much I can get in here. So, on Tuesday evening, Anne was no longer conscious. Her breathing was light. My emotional state was now extreme. I was powerfully, deeply awake, and Anne was right there. We were in communion. I could feel her around me and within me more intensely than I had ever known before. About 7:30, we were toasting her when I felt her call me, telling me that I had to come into the bedroom at once because she was dying right now. I leaped up from the table, ran in, threw my arms around her, and as her last few breaths came, said again and again, goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. Her last breath was as soft as the rising of a shadow in the dawn, and I said to my kids, Mother has died. Anne's life was devoted to finding and spreading joy, and at this moment I felt it at once as the greatest anguish and the deepest, most abiding happiness I think that I have the capacity to feel. We have both spent a lifetime in the Gurdjieff work and in meditation. And I went to the place within myself that was and is shared with her. I had promised a group of friends that I would let them know the moment it happened. And at 7:45 p.m. I texted them the news. Later that night at 9:20, she had just been taken away, and the house was empty of her. I was sitting alone, bereft, and asking her if she still existed, and if so, would she somehow contact me? I was asking her with carefully structured intensity in my inner voice, and a moment later, my phone rang. It was a dear friend, something of a psychic, saying that she just that moment had a message from Anne to call me. I was so grateful and surprised that I almost couldn't reply to the woman. It was a lovely moment. At 6 o'clock on the morning after her death, a filmmaker of our acquaintance found himself waking up. It was unusual for him to awaken at that early hour. He immediately felt the presence of Anne all around him. She said, "I have lots of ideas." In the next moment, he found the way to end a film he had been struggling with for 2 years. He had a lot of it shot, but has now been unable to come up with the ending. In this life, she'd been concerned about this. Now, from the next, she gave him what he needed. On the second day after her passing, my kids and I decided to go out into the desert. We stayed there Friday and Saturday, and then on Sunday went from Palm Springs into the mountains to Idlewild. Even though I could feel and hear Anne, I was really extraordinarily lost. Only once before in the 45 years of our marriage had we been apart for more than a few days. That was in 1988 when I went on a 2-week author tour to Australia and New Zealand. Now I was apart from her for 5 days and looking ahead to something that seems impossible, the rest of my life apart from her. I was sitting on a bench in the Idlewild Nature Center thinking about Anne and the call I'd gotten. I began to think that maybe it had been a coincidence, but I wasn't sure. Both Anne and I are good at contacting the dead, so was it? I asked her, was it a coincidence, or are you really still aware of this world and your old lover? Once again, my phone rang. This time it was another friend. She said, "I just felt a sudden need to call you." I had the feeling Anne was asking me to. That did it. It might have happened like that once, but not twice. Over the course of my life, I've had the luck and privilege to have so many contacts with the other world that I do not doubt that it is there. But these two were the most perfect and the most absolutely clear. Anne was there. She was aware of my thoughts. She was able to influence the minds of others and to communicate with me. Wow. Very powerful stuff. We have run a few minutes overtime, so I have to wrap it. But I tell you what, there's more and more interesting stuff. So I will, for sure, continue this next week. But until then, have a wonderful, inspiring, connected,